Hello and welcome to Lucky episode 200. It's a pleasure today to be joined by, among other things, a fellow podcaster, and that's Adam Vitcavage. Adam Vitcavage is the founder of Debutiful, a website and podcast where readers can discover debut authors. The podcast was named one of the best book podcasts by Book Riot, Town and Country, and Los Angeles Review of Books in 2022. His criticism and interviews have also been featured in Electric Literature, Pace Magazine, Literary Hub, Phoenix New Times, among others. He currently lives in Denver and he's rocking a great Orioles hat. How are you today?
I am doing fabulous. Stoke, the Orioles are currently doing decent. I don't trust that it'll last. I will jinx them. But thanks for having me for 200. Really honored to be part of the journey that you're doing and all the crazy good work you're doing. So thank you for inviting me.
Oh, pleasure. Appreciate it so much. I love your work. I love the timing. I have a lot of compliments I'll give you, and we'll talk a little bit more about it. But awesome to talk to a fellow podcaster. God dang, you got a lot of books back there.
It's for better or worse, I don't throw away ARCs. I keep them, loan them out a lot. The goal is a full library. So, eventually if there's offspring in my future with Lady Debutiful, they can read. I always have books. So
yes.
we'll see.
Any rhyme or reason, by color, by genre?
No, the bookshelf behind me is just you get so many books, etc. I just start throwing them. I have two shelves in the living room which rotate out to be like my favorite books and ones I want on display. This is not that these aren't bad or anything, but it's like so many books, so little time, so little shelf space.
There you go. I got you. Oh man, well, again, pleasure to talk to you. Obviously you're a literary dude. I would love to know kind of how it started. I mean, have you always been that way? Have you been the kid, getting that limit at the library of 10 or 15 or whatever it was? Did it come to you kind of later in life? What was kind of like your early relationship with reading and writing, the written word?
Yeah, definitely. I always was one of those kids who like had a story I was writing like about monkeys in space or like ripping off Chronicles of Narnia. And things like that. So I always thought I would be a writer, and I'm not. I don't write fiction now at all. I don't even attempt to. But definitely more of a reader always. My mom loves cozy murder mysteries like Mary Higgins Clark. I think I did a book report on in 6th grade, like way too early, but like it was her favorite book.
Did you get a call home from the teacher? Or?
No, probably actually. But yeah, like I mentioned, like ripping off Chronicles of Narnia, that was huge. I got like the box set as a gift, some holiday, and read them all. And yeah, reading murder mysteries, and then always trying to read books that I were well past like my age limit. Like I remember reading Rocket Boys, aka October Sky, when the movie came out, and like the book is like a 500-page book memoir, and I'm reading it like in 4th grade, thinking I understand the intricacies of this memoir. Yeah,
that tome right there, man.
Yeah,
jeez. As you got into like high school, college, I mean, I don't know if you like studied literature. I don't know if that was
sure. Yeah. I got my undergrad, my degree in English education, so I thought I was going to be a teacher.
Ew.
And I tried it and was bad at it, and like I blocked it out for my early 20s. God bless anyone who does teach. I was terrible at it. And it was funny, between going to school for like, I guess, an English related degree to my mid-20s, like I wasn't reading. I didn't read anything new. And I think it was 2015, I was like, I'm going to read a book a week. I had not read a book a week in my entire life, probably since I was a kid. And I was reading a lot of new stuff that came out. That was the year Station 11 came out. Redeployment won the National Book Award. So a lot of good books were coming out. And then by the end of that, just like transitioning to why I do what I do, I just I knew how to write freelance because I wrote for like music and television, pop culture websites at Pace Magazine. And I just like hustled and like emailed publicists saying, I don't have any bylines and I would love to interview X. And some people said yes. And yeah, I fell into interviewing authors that way.
So you've never been one to shy away from, the worst they can say is no, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah, might as well take a shot always. Like, whether it's trying to get, a date or asking an award-winning author to let me interview them. Might as well ask.
Nice comparison. Is any like, I mean, any like hipster bands or something that you like, you found before anyone else, like when you're writing about music?
I don't think I found anyone before anyone else, but like the big bands I was always proud of like doing early coverage for. There's a band out of Indianapolis called Margot and the Nuclear So-and-Sos. It's a musician named Richard Edwards, who I think is brilliant.
Okay.
And I interviewed him for one of his albums, and then like months later, years later, he emailed me out of the blue saying, "Hey, I really appreciate like the questions you had. I'd love for you to like cover me again."
Whoa.
And yeah, so like that's like my most like indie hipster street cred that I give myself. I don't know if anyone else cares, but it was like magical for me.
Who, in those not, not fallow years, but fairly fallow years, we weren't reading as much maybe, or even back into the college days, like, but who were some of the writers, or what were some of those transformational, like, that's like, oh my gosh, you can do this in a book or a poetry collection or a short story?
Yeah, I during college, like when I kind of started reading more, I became really obsessed with like white guy canon. For better or for worse, I admit it now, but like J.D. Salinger, John Updike,
Yeah.
Philip Roth, I was obsessed with them. John Cheever.
Okay.
That's who like I was not exposed to like writers of color, which is embarrassing from me and from the college I went to, right?
Sure.
But the book that changed everything for me and made things click in, I mentioned like Redeployment. I think that's a brilliant short story collection. The Turner House by Angela Flournoy I loved, but Salvage the Bones by Jesmyn Ward
Oof.
I finally read. I read in 2011 and like loved it, and then I reread it in 2015. I was like, oh, I get it. It like clicked. Like, this is brilliant, beautiful writing.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, she's been a favorite of many for sure, that I've talked to.
Yeah, she is like my favorite living writer. I talk about her all the time and recommend her books whenever I can.
Yeah. You mentioned Cheever. I was randomly just thinking of one of his short stories the other day. Well, I would say the one about the waspy family in New England, but I think they're all about
Every
that, right?
single one. Yeah.
Hifty. Hifty was the nickname for the kid. They're like on the beach, and he's they call him Tifty because that's the way his slippers always were, and it's like a family falling out. But anyways,
Yeah.
yeah, very waspy, boat shoes, using the word summer as a verb, right?
Yeah. I was obsessed with that in my 20s. Yeah.
Hey, did
Yeah.
you get into David Foster Wallace as well?
No, I never did. Like
Oh.
randomly, weirdly enough, I guess. Yeah, there's some big behemoth writers I just haven't read, and I talk about this with like friends. I don't read, like, I'm not going back and reading old stuff, which I know is like a blind spot of mine. Like classics I miss. Like I talk about Brandon Taylor way too much, but he was been tweeting about Edith Wharton, and I have like not read her thoroughly. And it's
Same.
like, like,
Hey, there's only so much you can read, right?
yeah. And with Day Beautiful, I made a decision, uh, to do what I do, and to do it well, I have to read a lot. And so
Exactly.
sometimes reading for pleasure takes a back seat. This
Right.
year I've been trying to be more healthy with it. Like I read books about the sea in the early parts. I've been reading some like American Gothic horror, like
Okay.
Dracula. I guess that's not American, but Dracula, Frankenstein, etc.
Yeah.
Now I'm doing some presidential biography. So I'm trying to like
Oh
piece
wow.
into like
Yeah.
read some things for pleasure for the first time in a while.
Well, are we talking like what's his name, like Robert Caro, and like 800
Yeah,
page?
yeah.
How about having multiple volumes about Lyndon Baines Johnson? Multiple volumes.
I heard brilliant things about it, and I'm just afraid to
Yeah.
read 10,000 pages on Lyndon B. Johnson.
You were one of the greatest Twitter followers, as is Brandon Taylor.
Thanks. Yeah, Brandon Taylor, I talk about him too much. It's like a reoccurring joke with my friends who do listen to the podcast. And they're like, do you know him? And I was like, yeah, we're internet. We DM, I guess, but I don't know him, like, but he's the best person to follow on social media. I think his tweets can be a whole essay collection themselves.
Pretty much. I was trying to find like the genesis or the beginning of the beautiful, and like, you have different permutations of it. Was he like the second episode possibly?
Yeah, he was technically the third, I guess. I did a test podcast with 4 authors.
Okay.
And then just to see if I can like piece it together and learn how to edit. And then Emma Copley Eisenberg, who wrote The Third Rainbow Girl, was the first one. Then Brandon Taylor was February of 2020. Yeah, right before the pandemic.
Oh man, yeah, I was same thing with me. Right, I started I think April 1st with some terrible sound quality. You know what I mean? Like embarrassing to listen to.
Yeah,
Oh man.
it's interesting. Being a DIY podcaster, it's you're learning everything. You're
Right.
not having a producer,
Yeah.
learning what mic works, learning how to edit,
Oh,
learning if you edit. Like I leave in a lot of my like
yes.
mistakes because I find it more fascinating, but that's me. I don't know if people like it.
I'm like kind of a little bit too old and a little bit too out of like the memes and gifs or whatever. But you know the famous DiCaprio one where he's pointing at the TV. I think from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Yeah.
For me, that's like editing and finding like an like I can see an from 20 feet away.
Yeah.
You know what I mean on the editing.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I leave it in. I leave the awkward pauses.
Mm,
I really like it to feel, and this came from another author who I hadn't actually interviewed, and they were just a fan of the pod, but they're like, it just feels like a coffee shop conversation.
yes.
And then once like I kind of honed in on that as like the craft, I was like, yeah, that's fine. I likes, I say definitely a lot. Like after every
Same.
single time someone says something,
Same.
definitely, it sounds good. Okay, great. And then
Yeah.
uh,
Is my thing, man.
yeah,
Oh
yeah,
gosh.
definitely.
Yeah, no, the whole like I kind of hate the word curating because I feel like everyone says everything's curating now. Like, oh, I
Hmm.
curated your food. But like
Yeah.
yours sounds curated, but not. And I mean that's the highest possible compliment. Like you said, it's very, very natural. It is very coffee shop. That's a great way to put it. The you have the balance between like this is very, scholarly, but also just like cool and kick it with a friend kind of thing.
Yeah, it's been interesting. I think when I first started interviewing like for Electric Lit Millions, I think at the time they were more like Q&A interviews, like tell me about this, tell me about that. And that's
Right,
kind of what
right.
Day Beautiful has come back to, but instead of being like a natural conversation sometimes. But yeah, I try
Gotta
to
have
mix
some
it
of that.
up. Yeah, I try to have fun and keep it casual. That's really what Day Beautiful has always been about.
Definitely. And I don't know that any podcast uses, sexy books as much as you do.
I love sexy books.
Who
Books are
doesn't?
sexy. They got a vibe right.
Who doesn't?
They have to,
Well,
yeah.
so is that redundant then to say sexy books?
Yeah, I guess all books are sexy.
Some
At
are
least
more
the ones
sexy
I
than others.
cover.
For sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Love sexy books. Love a good vibe, definitely.
There you go. So doing, book adjacent work, like it sounds like you don't necessarily now, but you worked in
Mhm.
bookstores and all that, like, and just kind of like real world experience. You do communications now. Like, how do you feel like writing for interviews and
Mhm.
criticism, writing for more business like with the communications, working in bookstores? How do you feel like your podcast is informed by the other work and vice versa?
Yeah, I think when I I was on the events team part time at Changing Hands in Phoenix. They were really instrumental in Day Beautiful becoming what it was. The owners and the buyer, Michelle, at the time, and then being the director of events for Tatter Cover here in Denver for 2 years. It really taught me how to look for books more than the interview and like look for under the radar titles and look for authors who weren't being covered. Um, from a writing perspective and interview perspective, I think what interests me is being a storyteller. Like I don't say I'm a writer, I don't say I'm a storyteller, but I've been thinking about it more often. And the Day Beautiful, I want the author to tell their story. It's like a quick Wikipedia version of their life.
Yeah.
And I feel like so many times, and just in coverage, authors talk about the book a lot, but and maybe they don't want to talk about themselves, but I find a lot do want to talk about themselves. So I think like, being in communications and working in media now for a nonprofit, part of what I do is like storytelling, interviewing people, and really just realizing people do like to talk about themselves
Yes, they
regardless of how
do.
introverted they are.
Sure.
And letting them share their story. And it's really just magical to like be a part of it, the stories that people are sharing.
Hmm. Well, yeah, like you do on the show, like you always ask. It's a simple question, but I love it. Like it's definitely underrated. You say like, how would you describe your book?
Mhm.
Not the, what's not what
Yeah.
the genre is for Barnes and Noble, not
Yeah.
what your publicist, not what the publishing company says, right? So, how would you describe your podcast?
Yeah, Day Beautiful is, I mean, I think I have the publicity copy down. Day Beautiful is the podcast where readers can discover debut authors through in-depth interviews.
Boom,
But
boom.
how I really describe it is like imagine a guy who just reads a lot, wanting to know the most basic questions and not being afraid to ask dumb questions.
Yeah.
That's what Day Beautiful is. Like, I did not get an MFA. I did not take any creative writing courses in college.
Mm-hmm.
I just know what books are like, what makes me feel sexy when I read, and I want to talk about that.
Yeah. So I mean, like, you talked a little bit about what were like the seeds for. I mean, you started in February 2020. You know, it's not like you just went from some totally different industry or way of life to that. You've been talking about dipping your toe in more than that with writing for these magazines and stuff. But why? I mean, was it around COVID? I feel like it's a little before COVID even hit, but like, and then maybe growing the show maybe came from COVID. I just wonder about how how Zoom and how just kind of the world we're in and just your own life kind of led to Day Beautiful.
Yeah, definitely. The like short version is, after college, I didn't want to be a teacher. I took a internship and started writing freelance for Pace Magazine, interviewing television actors and writers. And so I had like that background, and then freelanced Electric Lit Hub, Millions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I was working for the government at the time, actually. So I was not teaching, I was not working for bookstores. And I just thought of the name Day Beautiful. And in December of 2018, and launched Day Beautiful, the website, in January 2019. Like, just did it DIY blog style.
Yeah.
And then Day Beautiful, the podcast, came about by some authors I had interviewed and become friends with, and some publicists I had just worked with for 5 years, asking if I wanted to do a podcast. And I had dabbled in it in the music industry. Like, I did a short-lived, you can't find it on the internet anymore, interview podcast from indie musicians. So I was like, yeah, I'll try it. And podcasting is fun. There's a lot of them. It's easy, but it's also hard. And so I always think of Day Beautiful as a website that happens to have a podcast. The website still gets more traction than listens. So, but yeah, I started the podcast in like December 2019. So less than a year later, with that soft launch. Emma Copley Eisenberg, Brandon Taylor, Chelsea Beaker. It was like 3 who's who of the literary scene back to back. But then COVID hit. Yeah, like you said, I started it right when COVID came. And yeah, I was, at the time, I was using Skype. Like, Zoom wasn't a thing. Like, I didn't know what Zoom was, right?
What happened to Skype?
It got eaten up by Zoom.
They just fumbled the bag, man.
Yeah. So so the audio quality was poor. People were calling in on their cell to it. So it was just like it wasn't a thing. But yeah, and then luckily for me, COVID hit and authors canceled their book tours. And I said, I will take any author who wants to talk to me. Yeah. I will not read the book necessarily because I don't have time, but I will let you read, and then I'll talk to you because I'm interested. I could do that. And yeah, the website or the podcast like took off in April of that year. Like, it was just a lot of traffic. And it's not like I'm Day Beautiful super world famous. It doesn't get that many listens. I always say that it's there. Yeah, it was interesting. And like, Zoom really saved the book industry, like, flat out, for podcasts, for book events. Without Zoom, I don't know what would have happened to the indie bookstore industry even. So
yeah, no doubt about it. Yeah, no, you have a really good website. I know it's something I need to do better. Like, you have that, it's the balance between the great podcast and the website. The website's got a lot there. The pictures stand out. You talking about indie groups. Is Saint Motel an indie group? You know Saint Motel?
Yeah, they're indie. Everyone's indie now. Taylor Swift is indie. Yeah, Saint Motel's fun though. Yeah,
my good friend's brother is in Saint Motel.
Oh wow, yeah. So they had one really fun album I loved. Yeah, they're super fun and dancey. Right? Everything's dancey. But yeah, I really like them.
So at the wedding, I think it was that Just My Type, which is the classic dancey song. They're playing it, and all of a sudden people was like, wait, the guy from the band's here, and he went up to the stage. It's pretty cool.
That's awesome. Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like I don't know what indie is anymore. It's been a while for me, I think.
Exactly. Know. Yeah.
I'll throw out. What kind of feedback have you gotten from listeners? Like the fun stuff.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is asking me questions about how to break into like the writing industry. It's a lot of like emerging writers who aren't following a traditional path, whatever that may be, because it could be MFA, it could be non-MFA, it could be whatever. But a lot of the feedback is like they learned a lot from the craft questions, or they learned, etc. That's most of the feedback, which I find interesting. And it leads me to think like maybe Day Beautiful is almost like an insider podcast, like a trade publication, where it's a lot of writers listening to it as opposed to readers. But maybe not. Maybe that's just who emails you. You know, like certain type of people email you.
Yeah.
But I think the biggest compliment, like that coffee house question or comment, where it's just like natural, and I think people pick up on that vibe where I don't take it too seriously, but I take it seriously enough, like that I'm doing it semi-professionally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why debuts? Like what was it that drew you about, the debut in particular?
I think it was when I was writing pretty heavily for other outlets, and other outlets can't say yes to every single interview. It's just like the reality. And I think I had realized I had interviewed like 3 debut authors in a row. And then I started reaching out to publicists saying like, hey, like I'm like, if you have someone that's not getting coverage, I'll gladly do it. And I think like, so it started from a practicality standpoint, but like the passion is getting to know these people who nobody knows yet, being able to ask them like, oh, like, where did you get your MFA? Like, sure, it's on their website, but maybe not everyone knows it.
Sure.
Yeah, so it started from a practicality standpoint, and then blossomed into like the people writing debuts are doing things that seasoned authors maybe aren't, because they're in the groove of what they have written since 1995, for better or for worse. Like some of my favorite authors write the same book over and over again. Yeah, so the boring answer is practicality. It was easier to get access to them at the time. Like this is before podcasts, this is before Bookstagram. And then like the passionate answer is like, yeah, getting to know these people and being able to tell their story.
Makes sense. Yeah. I sometimes I overdo the like the sports analogies, but like this idea of like, man, like so and so's trying for that first championship, finally gets it. It's just a battle. I want to thank God. I want all this time I spend in the gym. Is there something? And then almost like by definition, it's literally impossible to want the next one as much. You know what I mean? Like you've got to the top of the mountain. Like, am I overdoing it with like, do you see that with authors? Like, not that there's like a fall off, but just kind of like there's something innate to the like that hunger for the debut.
Yeah, I think, I mean, so many authors I've interviewed, some of like it's taken a decade to write the book, right? It's taken half a decade, and people pour their blood, sweat, and tears into it without knowing it's going to be published. I think like, yeah, second books are super great. Like Alexandra Chang's new book, her second book is brilliant. Brandon Taylor's second and third books were brilliant. Chelsea Beak, there's people who I love whose second books are brilliant, but it's like, it didn't take 10 years necessarily. It didn't take a wish and a dream and pure talent. Not that second books don't take pure talent, but it's like, you don't know if you're ever going to publish when you're writing a debut. And sometimes you do know you're going to publish a second book, and it takes the pressure off. That's me speaking. No one's ever really said that, but yeah, I do. The sports analogy of we finally did it. LeBron James winning it in Cleveland, finally doing it for Cleveland. As much as I don't root for LeBron James, it was a great moment. He did it.
Yeah, definitely. Is it like, shoot, I'm gonna do the sports analogy again, as like, when I used to coach basketball, like, I would watch film. This was, it wasn't that long ago, but like, I know they have all kinds of more complicated film and all that, but like, you watch film on the game and you could watch that for hours. And so you're watching the game differently, right? You're watching it as a coach. You watch, even in your home watching the, Lakers game, and you're just watching it a little bit differently. Like, does that affect the way you read? Like, is it harder to read for pleasure, or is it add pleasure knowing that, knowing what you do now and having met these authors and know the process a little more?
I feel when I get into a book that I really, really like, it feels pleasurable, even though I know it's for debut. But there are times when it does feel like work, and I've talked about this. Like I think it's a little bit of an unhealthy relationship where it's like I'm like it feels just like content I'm shoving down my throat at times, to make sure I am getting all the books in front of me that are sent to me. I'm giving them proper time, giving them 50 pages, which is why like this year I am taking time out to read books about the sea, and then gothic horror, and now president books. Yeah, because I think there's been times where I'm just like, "Day Beautiful is good. I could end it right now. I did everything I needed to do." So it is interesting. That happened to me with music and television. I had interviewed like Amy Poehler from Parks and Rec, like at the height of it, right? And I was like, I was watching sitcoms and like criticizing every single moment of it. And I try not to do that with books, because I think books are more of an art form where I don't necessarily need to agree with it or enjoy it, but I see what they're doing.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is interesting. I have a love-hate relationship with books at this point in my life.
Yeah.
How about you? Do you feel that same way? Do you feel you're over reading sometimes?
Yes.
Yeah.
I do. So I listened to one of your episodes with Gabby Bates, right? With Judas Goat, and like you were just talking about like in the intros where she read part of it that came out. I don't know what. I think within this calendar year.
Yeah, it was this year for sure.
Right?
Yeah, like
but
February-ish.
I love poetry. I found poetry to be more difficult. You were talking about like, when you listen to poetry, there's like a million emotions thrown out at once. And, it's so true. Someone like Gabby's, these great poets, it's just like, geez, there's like 10 images right there that you could, analyze, overanalyze, misanalyze. But yeah, I mean, I guess long story short, I guess like I have more trouble with poems, as far as like, I want to, as a teacher, I'm kind of like, all right, well, I don't want to overdo it too. Like, what are the themes of this? Like, tell me, author, what is the theme? You know, both of us know, like, a lot of times they're like, I don't know. What does it mean to you? I didn't, Reina Grande is a novelist, nonfiction, a little bit from, she lives in Sacramento area now.
Yeah.
And she used to come down and speak to my students in LA. We read one of her great fiction books. And it's a lot about like the double life this girl leads and this and that. And the main character's last name is Luna. So I'm telling my students, oh yeah, the Luna, the moon, it's changing. And we had a chance to ask her, and I'm like, I was kind of like all knowing. I'm like, you named him Luna, right? Because of the, the changing. She's like, no, just like the name.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Sometimes the name is just a name. So I hear you. I try not to overanalyze, and sometimes I'm in the middle of a conversation. I'm like, dang it, like I've asked like 10 straight questions, like, what did that line mean?
Yeah.
There's different ways to get to it, I think, right?
Definitely.
Yeah. If you had one more episode left, hopefully you have many, like, would you go nonfiction? Would you go fiction? Would you go poetry? Would you go, thriller? Would you do you have a favorite genre, or is it even hard to say?
I think if I had one podcast left, just that was it, I would interview Jesmyn Ward, who's not a debut author.
Yeah.
And I'd want it to be structured in like I was writing for Vanity Fair, like a profile on her, and I was just getting all the background I could, going from book 1 to book 2 to book 3 for like 2 hours, like a 2-hour deep dive with her. Yeah. I think I had interviewed her before for The Millions, when Sing and Buried Sing came out, and that was short. It was just about the book, but I think like, yeah, having a sit down with my favorite living writer just for 2 hours, which normally Day Beautiful's, Q&As, interviews are like 20, 30, 40 minutes. But yeah, that would be my last one I would do. I would just say, hey, I want this to happen.
Drop the mic, play Sinatra's My Way, out.
Yeah.
Right. Any other names so I'm going to throw, Tobias Wolff is in many ways the inspiration for this podcast, even the title. I know someone who knows someone, that's a possibility down the road. LeVar Burton for me would be incredible. Brandon Taylor's one. I don't know, any names you want to throw out in the ether that we're like, manifesting? Whether they're debut authors or not. Obviously they're probably not, if you're going to say their names. Yeah,
I think God, this sounds so like, I think the big names who I love, I've interviewed.
Yeah.
And debuts, I don't know who's coming up. I don't know who the next book is 6 months from, you know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah, I've been lucky enough to do Jesmyn Ward, Michael Chavon. I haven't done Alexander Chi. I would love to talk to Alexander Chi
same,
more in depth. Yeah, I'll say that.
Definitely.
Yeah.